Hello everyone, this is the problem solving session 10 and today we are going to discuss topics on homeostasis and excretion system. So let's begin. Homeostasis is the state of steady internal chemical and physical conditions which is maintained by a living system. This theory of homeostasis was first given by Walter Bradford Cannon in 1926. If you look at the word homeostasis, it is derived from two Greek words, homeos and histemi, which means similar and standing still, respectively. So, if you want to understand the meaning of homeostasis, it basically means something which is kept similar or something that stands still. So, to understand it from a living organism's perspective, it is a very crucial process for the survival of an organism, and it is seen as a resistance to change in the external environment. So, what it means is if there is a change in the external environment, the living system resists changes in its internal environment. So that's why it's a self-regulating process that regulates several internal variables which are necessary to sustain life. And they basically try to maintain a stable internal environment despite changes in the external environment. And what kind of variables does the homeostasis work on? It ranges from body temperature to blood pH, blood glucose levels, to fluid balance, and even electrolyte concentration, for example, sodium, potassium, and calcium ion. So in the figure here, if you see, this is what means by homeostasis. If you have to define this, you define homeostasis as the state of steady internal physical chemical conditions which is maintained by the living system. These are the different variables that they work on. They work on body temperature, fluid balance, and blood sugar. And these are the different processes that actually is how the homeostasis is carried out. For example, you have endocrine glands like hypothalamus that regulates the temperature and osmotic pressure. You have kidneys that maintain the water balance. You have the blood which distribute heat throughout the body. Then you have evaporation of water that regulates the body temperature. You have pancreas that takes care of the blood sugar level, and you have the skeletal muscle contraction that releases heat. Yeah, so an example of homeostasis is, for example, let's say you have had a food. So right immediately after a meal, the level of blood glucose grows up. So as and when the blood glucose level goes up, pancreas responds to this increase in concentration of glucose and it releases insulin. Insulin affects or insulin works by making the body cells take up this glucose, which are ultimately taken to liver, and their liver takes up the glucose and stores it as for further use, and as a result the blood glucose level goes down and the body returns to the normal condition. So you see what is happening here. So there is a certain level of each component or each of the processes in the body system, and when it shoots up or high, the body functions such that the conditions return to normalcy, and that's what happens during homeostasis. We'll see several examples of this. So let's go on to about regulation of homeostasis. So to first understand the complete procedure of homeostasis, we can divide it into three components: receptor, control center, and effector. Now, what is receptor? So it's a stimulus is something which is perceived as a change in the external environment. So let's say there is a change that is perceived by the system. So it is a stimulus. So the receptor is the one that this is the sensing component. So this monitors and they respond to the changes of the external environment. So they take up the cue of the stimulus and they relay the information to the control center via an input mechanism. This control center is also called an integration center. So it receives this information from receptor and it processes this information, and then it sends an output. So it's something similar to what is happening on the computer system on a circuitry. So you have someone who's receiving the signal, sending to it to the control center, which is computing the process of the information, and then giving the output. So it then releases the output, which goes to the effector. This effector is the actual, let's say, the muscles or the cells that respond to these kind of changes in the external environment and brings back the normalcy in the internal environment. So these are the three components. You have receptor, control center, and the effector. Now, who is responding to these external cues. Based on that, you can divide the system into two type of regulation, as auto-regulation and extrinsic regulation. So in auto-regulation or intrinsic regulation, the response which is given to us external environment is automatic in a cell or tissue or organ. What I mean by automatic is there is no other system which is controlling that response. That response is indigenous to the cell or the responding system. But in extrinsic regulation, you have nervous system and endocrine system, and we'll see how in detail this happens. So you have these two systems which are controlling what kind of effect these cells or tissues or organs will give to the cues that is being received. Now, because it's a regulatory process, there are feedback mechanisms that control the functioning of these systems. So based on that, you have a negative feedback system and a positive feedback system. Just by logic also, if you just try to understand by the terminology, negative means to stop, positive means to enhance. So in negative feedback system, what happens is you have a stimulus, and then the body system responds in such a way that the stimulus effect goes down. For example, body temperature or any other, so let's say blood glucose level. So you have a stimulus, let's say it goes either high or up from the normal concentration. So what happens is the body system responds in a way that the stimulus effects goes down. But in positive system, you have the response in a way that it enhances the stimulus effect. So here if you see, so this is a stimulus to which you have a response. That response works to reduce the stimulus, and it gives a negative feedback to the loop to stop this effect because this stimulus effect has gone down. But in positive system, when the response is actually the first level, when the response is mediated, it enhances the stimulus and it responds back in a way that the whole system repeats over and over again, so that the effect of stimulus goes higher. We'll understand that in a better explanation when I explain these two feedback systems individually. So let's do that. So first, let's talk about negative feedback system. So in negative feedback system, when there is a change in a certain direction, the idea of negative feedback system is to reduce that effect, either to bring it back to normalcy. So bring it back to set point. So a set point, let's say a particular concentration of an ion, or blood glucose level, or a certain ionic concentration or fluid constant balance. So all these are set points. These are normal, ideal normal values of a variable. So what is the normal body temperature that is said to be, like, what is our normal body temperature for a human being? 37 degrees centigrade or 98 Fahrenheit and 8.6. So what, these are the set points, these are the ideal values. Now then there are some error values. These error values can be higher than the set point or lower than the set point. But when these kind of values are reached, the entire system, this is homeostatic feedback system, works to bring these values back to normal. So in a flow chart, if you have to understand, so let's say this is the normal condition. There is a stimulus which is above this normal condition. Then still there is a corrective mechanism to bring this back to normal. Even if the stimulus is below normal, you have a corrective mechanism to bring it back to normal. And this is best understood by body temperature. Very important, very easy also to understand, because it's happening normal day in your life and you can see these changes. So let's say you have a normal body temperature. Now your body temperature increases. When does that increase? Let's say you have fever or any other inflammation. So what is the body response? The idea is to bring the temperature down because the body temperature has gone up. So you start sweating. And when you start sweating, and when body sweating, basically evaporation. So when evaporation happens, there is local cooling. So your body temperature goes down. And the contrary, when the body temperature reduces, when does it reduces? When you feel cold, when you are in a cold environment. So what does the body do? So the idea is to increase the temperature. So the body will start shivering. And what is shivering? Shivering is basically involuntary muscle movement. So because of shivering, you generate heat, and then the body temperature increases and it brings back to normalcy. So that's a very simple example of negative feedback. And we'll do this, we'll explain, understand this in a bit more mechanistic way. So the same thing, when your body temperature is high and you want the body temperature to go down, what all happens in your body? The blood vessels dilate. When it dilates, there is heat loss. The heat is lost to the environment, and you have the sweat glands which secrete the fluid. These are sweat. And because this fluid will evaporate, again via the fluid, the heat is lost to the environment, and because there is heat loss, your body temperature goes down. On the contrary, if you want to increase your body temperature, your blood vessels start constricting so that the heat is conserved. Sweat glands no longer produce the fluid, and there is shivering, which generates the heat. So that's how your body maintains the system. This was about body temperature regulation. The feedback system, negative feedback system, is also seen in blood pressure regulations. When there is higher blood pressure, what is when does the blood pressure increase? When there is constriction in blood flow, when there is restricted blood flow. So when there is restricted blood flow, what happens is the idea is to dilate your blood vessels so that the blood pressure is relieved. So that's what happens when your blood pressure goes up, your blood vessel starts to dilate so that the blood pressure comes back to normalcy. On the opposite side also, if the blood pressure is too low, the blood will start to pump, the heart will start to pump more vigorously so that more blood can flow through it, so that it comes back to normalcy. And there are several other examples, for example, blood sugar regulation, which we will do in detail in the coming slides. And there is osmoregulation, which is the regulation of water level, and especially if you consider it to be the urine or excretory system. There we'll read the role of these hormones, ADH, which actually is involved in regulating the water balance. But just to give an overview again, to summarize the negative feedback system, you have an initial event or a stimulus which affects a certain variable. This change in variable, this variable could be anything, temperature or blood glucose level, and this change is received by the receptor, takes it to the control center, which compares this value against the reference value or the set point. Then it gives the information to effector to make adjustment, which is in the opposite direction of the initiation event or the stimulus. And this effector then does the negative feedback to the variable, which comes back to normalcy. Now we move on to positive feedback. As I had mentioned, positive feedback is responsible for increasing the deviation. So there is a deviation from normal state. Instead of returning it to the set point, positive feedback system increases that deviation. So there is an increase of the changes. So it basically leads to the reinforcement of the system or the stimulus. And you see, even though that is comparatively less, but you see multiple examples of positive feedback system in the nature. The first is childbirth. So how does this cue happen? So when the time to deliver is near, or when it is about to be delivered, so what is the cue to begin it? So the movement of the baby's head towards the cervix, it is the stimulus. What happens when there is a stimulus of the baby head moving towards the cervix? The cervical tissue tension changes, and because of these changes, so what happens is cervix is stretching. There are receptors on the cervix which are called the stretch receptors. They perceive the signal. They send it via nerve impulses to the brain. In the brain, you have hypothalamus. We have mentioned about this in the previous discussions as well. So you have hypothalamus. Hypothalamus perceives the information, and it stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is the response variable. It goes to the uterus. Instead of calming it down, instead of reducing the contractions and reducing the stretching, it enhances the uterine contractions, and it works to push the baby towards the cervix. So it is enhancing the initial stimulus, and that's how it's positively. So that's how over the period of time the contractions get so higher that the female is into greater pain. So this is a very classic example of positive feedback system. The other example of positive feedback system is ovulation. Again, you have hormones like luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone that leads to the release of estrogen. The estrogen, they work positively to further enhance the secretion of luteinizing hormone, so that the secretion of estrogen is further enhanced. So this is again a positive feedback system. The other example is fruit ripening. So on a plant, let's say you have one fruit that has started to ripen. As and when the fruit ripens, it secretes ethylene. Ethylene is a ripening agent, so it signals the other fruits also to ripen. So there is this is synergistic effect. So all of these fruits will now start ripening, and again this is a positive feedback system. Then you have blood clotting. So we had studied about this in the previous discussion. As you remember, if there is a tear in the blood vessel, you have these platelets which come up together, clotting factors which come up together, and they stop the blood flow, thereby forming a mesh. But that formation of clot is by positive feedback, because the platelet secretes chemical to attract more of these platelets to come to the site of injury, and that additional release of chemicals is what is enhancing the initial signal of the break in the blood vessel. So this is also an example of positive feedback system. So to summarize these two systems, again, we have so the first thing is positive system basically results in the amplification of the output signal, while the negative results in the inhibition or the slowing down of the process. Positive system bolsters the stimulus, increases the productivity of the stimulus, while the negative system reduces the productivity of the stimulus. And this is what I was mentioning. Negative feedback is a very much frequent process than positive feedback system. And because of that, and because of it being less associated with stability of the enzyme system, because that's what all these are enhancing the stimulus, and that is actually disrupting the system from a set point. So it is less frequent as compared to negative, which is bringing the all the changes back to normalcy. So these are some questions that I have compiled from previous year's assignments and from various sources. So we'll just go over this. So the first question is so these are based on the discussion that we have had till now. So what does homeostasis relates to? Disturbance in regulatory control, tendency to resist internal changes, plant and animal extracts used in homeopathy, or a tendency to change with change in environment. Next is the mechanism of regulation, generally between organism and its environment, of solutes, and the gain and the loss of water is called what? Is it homeostasis, hemostasis, thermoregulation, or osmoregulation? Next, the feedback control mechanism is related with which of these processes, like with bile secretion, HCl secretion, hormonal secretion, or Herring-Breuer's reflex? And what is the result of a failure in homeostasis? If there is a change, if there is no response by the homeostatic system, what is the result of this? Is it a disease? Is it adapting to the environment? Is it an evolution? Or one just cannot deviate from homeostasis because body always seems to adjust somehow or the other? I will give the answers and I hope that you can check. I explain in a while. You can just check if you have got that right. Yeah. So the first thing is homeostasis refers to what? So I thought you said answer D, but so the first thing is let's go over by each option. So the first is disturbance in regulatory control. That is not the case. Third is also not the case because it's something related to completely different thing. The second says it is a tendency to resist internal changes, and the fourth says a tendency to change. You do not change with the change in the environment because so the variable that is a change in the body temperature is is a response to a stimulus. That change in environmental is not changing your body environment. The change is something that you're trying to bring back to the controller, like where basically, so there is internal change and you try to resist that internal change by bringing it back to normalcy instead of, so it doesn't mean that if the body internal temperature goes up, or the external temperature goes up, your internal temperature will also go up. No, if your external temperature goes up and because of which your temperature is also going up and down, the body system works to bring it back to normalcy, and that is what is homeostasis, because we are endotherms. If it is ectotherms, they are the ones who are responding to the change in the environment with changes in their body system. But we strive to maintain an internal balance. Moving on to second question. This was about I'm giving options. Which of this relates to the regulation of water? And because it is water, it is C, which is osmoregulation. Thermoregulation means control or regulating the temperature. This is which of these is like which is a mechanism for feedback control, and it is hormone secretion, because we had gone over this point once. So there is hormones which are controlling these systems. Bile and HCl, they were very particular to digestive system, and Herring Brewer's completely different. It relates to lungs. And the fourth is, what is the result of failure in hemostasis? It is not adaptation to environment, because adaptation in environment cannot happen because of a failure in homeostasis. If there is a failure in homeostasis, you do not, because your body cannot be perpetually in an enhanced state. It's something to do with your body system. So you does not mean that you are adapting to the environment or there is an evolution. It means that there is a disease and you will have a problem within your system. So if you have too much of high temperature in your body, there is too much of fever. Because of high temperature, you have problems associated. If you are shivering way too much, your body temperature goes down way too much, and you have something called hypothermia. So your body undergoes a problem if there is a failure in homeostasis. And this cannot happen. One cannot deviate from homeostasis because the body will always adjust. This is not true, because homeostasis is also controlled by different systems. For example, nervous system or endocrine system. These are the systems which are controlling. So a failure in homeostasis means one of these systems not being able to function. So this line says that the body will always find a way to adjust, yes, given the factors that are controlling them are in proper conditioning. But if there is a failure, and what we mean by failure is these conditions or these systems are not behaving in an appropriate way. Okay. So moving on to the system, endocrine system, which we have discussed quite a lot of time. And now we will discuss in detail relating to what are the components of this system and how are they functioning. So I think this we have discussed multiple times, but I'll go over once again. So endocrine systems, they are basically responsible for chemical coordination, and so they control several involuntary physiological activities. So these are all the different glands which are part of the endocrine system, and all of them, as we will see, they control different parts of the body and different processes of the body by release of hormones. So these hormones are chemicals which are released by these glands, and they are ductless glands. So basically what they mean is they do not secrete into a duct. They secrete directly into blood, and these flow to the target organ or body cell, and they function there, the hormones. So these hormones, as you can imagine, if there is an ovary, it will work on the female reproductive system. If it is testicle, it works on the male reproductive system. If you have thyroid, it works on the thyroid glands and relative cells. Pancreas, as we had mentioned previously also, it has multiple roles. One of the primary role is to control the blood sugar level. So you have these different kind of glands working on different kind of processes in the body. So let's discuss hormone in a bit more detail. So these are tiny chemical messenger. They travel in the bloodstream directly, and their main function is to maintain the internal balance. And these themselves are also under the feedback control. So if a certain level of hormone is reached, there is a negative feedback loop given to the releasing gland to stop the secretion of hormones. If the certain level of hormone is not met, then there is a positive control to enhance the secretion of hormone, as we had seen in the ovulation, where we had more of luteinizing hormone to enhance the secretion of estrogen. Now these hormones, as you can see, they work by targeting or they binding to a very specific receptor. These, based on how they are perceived by the receptor sensitivity and the responsiveness, the effect of hormone is delivered. Like if there are more number of receptor, more number of hormones are bind, so the desired effect is enhanced. And the receptors are also different. Some of them are stick on the like they are fixed on the cell membrane. Some of them are inside the cytoplasm, so the hormone has to move inside the cell to bind to its receptor. Or it is even possible that the receptor is in the nucleus itself, so it has to also pass the nuclear membrane and go inside the nucleus. So there are different hormones that function at different stages or different phases in the system. Yeah. So these hormones, they are basically the main gland that secretes hormone is the hypothalamus, and they are secreted in the hypothalamus from the neurosecretory cells. So that's why they are also called neurohormones. And this is so in hypothalamus, when they are secreted, they are called releasing factors. So we'll see that these releasing factors will work on the pituitary glands, which are placed right below the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus is the main gland, but it really it secretes something called releasing hormones. These work on the anterior pituitary, which is the main hormone to actually regulate all the other glands. So you have two different posterior and anterior pituitary, and they work on these different kind of glands. So we'll see that which of the hormones are released from the anterior pituitary and which are the ones that are released from the posterior pituitary. Hormones themselves can be of different kind of molecular biomolecular nature. There can be peptide, polypeptide, proteins. They can also be of steroidic nature or iodothioneins or amino acid derivatives. And as I've already mentioned, that if they bind to the membrane bound receptors, then the hormones do not enter the cell. And in that case, what happens is there's a relay of information inside the cell, and there is a secondary messenger which passes on the information. But if the hormone has to bind with an intracellular receptor, it goes inside the cell, and then it regulates mainly the gene expression or chromosome functions. We'll see that in a while. So this is the first condition where you have these hormones binding to a receptor on this membrane. These kind of receptors are oxytocin. Where did we read about oxytocin? In the uterus, in the childbirth. ADH we will do in when we are studying excretory system, or growth hormones. So cells in which we which promotes the growth of the cells. So these hormones, because they are water soluble in nature, and that's why they cannot pass this lipid membrane which is present on the exterior of the cell membrane. Because they cannot bypass the lipid membrane, that's why they stay on the external environment and they bind to the receptor on the cell membrane. Now, I mentioned that because they cannot enter the cell, what happens is there is a secondary messenger. So, if a hormone binds to the receptor, the internal environment of the cell undergoes changes, and you have releases of several of these secondary messengers. So, these are all small molecules which are, so for example, here, let's say this is a GTPase activity. So, you have receptor binding to hormone. GDP changes to GTP. This GTP goes and binds to something called adenyl cyclase that has an ATP attached to it. So as and when this bind, there is something called cyclic AMP, which is a unit of the ATP. So ATP is triphosphate, AMP is monophosphate. So one unit of the ATP after the breaking or the separation of the two phosphates. Cyclization of this monophosphate happens, and then these small molecules, they activate several protein kinases. What are protein kinases? These are enzymes that work on several of the other proteins to bring about the effect. So let's say this hormone wanted to enhance a gene regulation or protein expression. So this cyclic AMP will now go and bind to that protein which will enhance that expression. So that's how the information is relayed inside the cell. And how is that stopped? Like they are under control, right? This process has to be proper. So after a certain level of that, let's say gene expression is reached, this signal has to be stopped. So it works now from backward side. The first, the cyclic AMP is stopped. The hormones are also then released. So these hormones they detach from the receptor, and then they are recycled in the kidneys and livers, so that they are also the enhanced signal is stopped. Otherwise, the signal will keep perpetuating, and this will lead to extra problems. So as you can see here, once the target cell responds to the changes, the cyclic AMP is deactivated by phosphodiesterase. So you also have enzymes in your body as checkpoints which stops the progression of signals. Moving on. So the next kind of receptor is mobile receptor. So these hormones will be lipid soluble, and as a matter of fact, because of them being lipid soluble, they can move inside the cell, and these are fatty acids or steroids. And because they now can move inside the cell, they will be able to bind to this receptor which are inside the cell or inside the nucleus. So you find them generally to be of the nature of the transcription factors. So what they do generally is they go and bind to gene expression module, and they regulate the transcription, basically the synthesis of mRNA. And you can imagine that is what important role it plays, because it is directly affecting the binding or the expression of a gene. And they're also called chemical messengers because they themselves regulate their own concentration. So after a certain level of hormone production, they themselves act as a regulator, so that their further release of hormone is inhibited, and they are that could be, so this is via negative, but if they want it to be further enhanced, it can also be via positive feedback, that they enhance their own production. So a very classic example or a very simple example. So this is thyroid gland, this is pituitary gland, and this is hypothalamus gland. So the chain of secretion begins with hypothalamus. Hypothalamus releases something called releasing hormones. So this here, because we are reading about thyroid gland, the first hormone that is secreted from hypothalamus is thyrotropic releasing hormone. This will go and work on anterior pituitary. It will release something called thyroid stimulating hormone. So it will go to thyroid and it will stimulate the thyroid to release its further components. So the pituitary gland secretion TSH will go and work on thyroid. Thyroid, when it receives the information from TSH, it will secrete its hormone, which are T3, T4, and we'll also later read the calcitonin. Now, we have 3 and 3T4. At a certain point of level, after their function have been met, T3 will negatively affect the anterior pituitary to stop releasing any more of TSH, so that no more of T3 is synthesized. And how about this? So the T4, instead of working for anterior pituitary, it will give signal to hypothalamus to stop the release of TRH. So now there is less of TRH, less of TSH. So the production of T3 and T4 goes down, and this brings it back to normal concentration. So that's how exactly the system of hormones work when they have to work as chemical messengers. Okay. So this was about hormones. Now let's talk about different endocrine glands that we have and what are the different components. So first, as I have mentioned about hypothalamus, so mainly it releases the releasing factors that work on the pituitary glands. And when does it secretes these all these hormones? When it receives information from the nervous system, and this we have done in the previous session, how the nervous system perceives the information and brings it to hypothalamus, and hypothalamus then release the information to the pituitary glands. So basically, you can call hypothalamus as a connection between the endocrine system and the nervous system. So these are the different hormones which are released from the hypothalamus. So you can see the name. So antidiuretic hormone, which actually works on the kidney, and we'll see about excretion system. Then you have corticotropic releasing hormone. This also we will come across in a little while. Then you have gonadotropic releasing hormone. So these will go. So none of these will go directly and bind to the organs that you can imagine from the name. They will go and affect. They will go and stimulate the pituitary glands, respective pituitary glands, to release the hormones. Then you have the growth hormone, either inhibiting hormone or releasing hormone, oxytocin and prolactin inhibiting hormone. So if you want to see here, these are the hypothalamus and these are the different so these are the pituitary. So the hormones from here goes and bind to this. So we'll see the pituitary glands now. So pituitary glands are also called hypophyses, and they are present in the middle cranial fossa. We had seen this in the previous section when we were doing the anatomy of brain. So they are also called master gland because they directly control the other glands and they regulate several of the system. For example, blood pressure, energy, thyroid gland, metabolism, childbirth, constant pain relief, so many different functions under the control of a single gland. It is further divided into two type of glands, or two parts basically: anterior on the frontal side and posterior behind it. So anterior is also called adenohypophysis, and this mainly controls stress, development, and reproduction and lactation. And so what happens here is, so after getting stimulated from the hypothalamus, these are the different kind of hormones that are released from the anterior pituitary. You have thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing, prolactin, and growth hormone. And you can see they all function on different organs. So the growth hormone goes to the bones, prolactin works on the mammary glands, FSH and LH works on the testes or ovary, TSH, as we have seen, thyroid, ACTH we'll see when we read about adrenal cortex, MSH are basically melanocyte stimulating hormones, so they work on the melanocytes. And then you also have endorphins, which are pain receptors in the brain. So the pain perception of pain is by endorphins. The next is posterior. They're called the neurohypophysis, and they are, as you can see, they are like connected by infundibulum. There are only two hormones that are released from posterior pituitary gland, which are antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. And antidiuretic hormone works on kidney, and oxytocin will work on the uterine muscles and the mammary glands. Moving on, the next gland is thyroid. Thyroid is situated in your neck region, and it's this two-lobed gland you can see here. And there is this thyroid isthmus, which is right at the lower two-thirds of the lobe. And the cells that make up these thyroids are called thyrocytes, and thyrocytes are the cells which release the hormone. So the main function of thyroid is to control metabolism, or like basically digesting food and converting into energy. And they release thyroid like so under the influence of thyroid stimulating hormone from the pituitary gland. They release these hormones, which are T3, T4, and calcitonin. T3 is called triiodothyronine, and T4 is thyroxine. And what together they do is they affect the metabolic rate and protein synthesis. They also affect the growth and development in the infants. And you also would have heard calcitonin or thyroid being important for calcium homeostasis. Other than that, thyroid hormones also modulate DNA expression transcription. So these hormones, they are basically the ones that work with the internal receptor system. So they work by modulating the transcriptions of DNA. And how do they do it? They bind to these receptors, TR alpha and TR beta, which are response elements and transcription factors. Transcription factors are responsible for enhancing the rate of expression or decreasing the rate of expression. And not only as a receptor, or they're not only as internal factor, they also function with this cell membrane receptor to, for example, with calcium ATPase or adenyl cyclase, to even carry out information via the relay of signals. So they work as both ways. They have both kind of receptors. Just situated with the thyroid gland, we have the parathyroid gland. So these are these small glands which are on this each lobe of the thyroid. They basically, their function is to keep the calcium level and phosphate level in the body to at a certain range, and that they do by the release of PTH or parathyroid hormone. And what they do, basically, how they regulate the calcium is by promoting the breaking of bones, or reabsorption from the renal system in the kidney, or by calcium from the food. So they work on digestive system or reabsorption, or by recycling the calcium from the bones. And as you can imagine, if you have more of this calcium, you would have heard about calcium stones in your body. So that happens if there is more of parathyroid secretion not under check, then there is this stone, bones become brittle and you have kidney stones. Next, you have adrenal glands, and adrenal glands are present on top of kidney. So you have these glands which reside on the top of these kidneys, and that's why they are also called suprarenal glands. Renal being a word for kidney system. So renal glands, so suprarenal glands, and you can see that here. That's how they look from lateral section. So they have medulla, and then the outer portion is cortex. If you see a cross section of this gland, you will see that the cortex is further divided into three parts. You have zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and zona reticulata, and then below that you have the medulla. So this is how, like, this is the portion. This medulla is here, and then the outer portions are here. Now, this is important to understand these two divisions, because these two divisions of the adrenal gland have definite activities, like they secrete particular hormones and they work in the opposite direction. We'll see. So like in response to, and basically in response to stress, they basically work for stress signaling. So they release hormone that controls salt and water balance, or blood pressure, and glucose metabolism. So if you want to see here, these three regions in the cortex, they secrete mineral corticoids, glucocorticoids, and androgens, while the medulla specifically releases the catecholamines and peptides. So let's do in detail. So first is corticosteroids. These corticosteroids are from adrenal cortex. They are of mainly two types: glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. The name says what they could work on. Glucocorticoids work on regulating the level of glucose. Mineralocorticoids basically work on maintaining the iron concentration of the electrolytes. And other than that, other than directly affecting on their target system, they also are responsible for immune responses or anti-inflammatory reaction and RBC production. And other than these two hormones, uh, there is release of androgens, and these are responsible for the sexual characteristics. Moving on, catecholamines. There are two main type of catecholamines: the adrenaline or non-adrenaline, and I'm sure this would have you would have at least somewhere heard of this, something called flight or fight response. So when you are in a state of emergency, when you get, let's say, scared, or when you are doing something very energetic, these are the hormones that bring about the changes in your body. They're called adrenaline and non-adrenaline, and they again work on two different kind of nervous system. We have read about this, about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So you have these epinephrine and non-epinephrine, or adrenaline and non-adrenaline, working to make your body elevated, like they give elevated response to a particular stress. And how do they do that? They increase the blood sugar level, they increase the blood supply to muscles, particularly limbs. And what does that help you in? They help you in running, they help you in moving your muscles faster, dilating the pupils, increasing the heart rate so that more blood is pumped into it and you have more energy to do whatever you want, tightening of jaw muscles. And these are all the classic reaction that you will have experienced if you are in a state of emergency or you were scared. So these are the hormones that enhance those reactions. Okay, moving on. The next gland is pancreas, and pancreas also we have done in the previous section, where we have seen that where we have seen the role of pancreas in digestive system. Now we will see how that also works as endocrine gland. So the digestive juices that were released by pancreas, they were released into ducts, and that's why they were exocrine in nature. While pancreas also works as endocrine with respect to controlling the blood sugar level, because by secreting hormones like insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, and polypeptides. So there are specific cells in pancreas that release these two different hormones. You have alpha cells that secrete the glucagon, and beta cells that secrete the insulin. And then there is delta cell that secretes somatostatin, while the F cell here secrete the polypeptides. So glucagon and insulin, they work in completely opposite manner. Glucagon works to enhance the or increase the concentration of glucose in the blood. Insulin works to reduce the concentration of glucose in the blood. That is the main difference between these two. So if the body wants more of glucose, it will enhance the secretion of glucagon. If the body wants more of, like, or less of glucose from the blood and more of them being stored in the body, it will enhance the secretion of insulin. So so glucagon basically results in hyperglycemia. Hyper means more, glycemia means carbohydrates or glucose. So hyperglycemia by stimulating glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Glycogen lysis means to break. So breaking of glycogen. What was glycogen? The stored product of, or the form in which glucose is stored in the body. So glucagon, because it wants more of glucose in the bloodstream, it will lead to breaking of these glycogen molecules so that glucose are released. And it will also enhance gluconeogenesis, means glucose synthesis. Neo means new, so new glucose synthesis. So they will enhance this synthesis of glucose, while insulin will do the opposite effect. It will more, because it is trying to reduce the concentration of glucose, it will lead to hypoglycemic condition, and it will work by enhancing glycogenesis. So glycogens, acis means secretion or synthesizing, so it increases the glycogenesis. Now, a person who has prolonged hyperglycemia, I will give the answer in a while, but if you would hear this more often. Like if they have more sugar in their blood, there is the situation is called something. and that is called diabetes, and I'm sure you have heard about this. So these are diabetes mellitus, and these people have hyperglycemic condition. That means their concentration of blood glucose is too high. So let's try to understand again what actually happens in this system. So this is glucagon. Glucagon is secreted as a response to the stimulus, and a stimulus being blood glucose level being lowered. So you have the cells releasing the glucagon. The glucagon goes, so this is alpha receptor, alpha cell, which binds, like which gets the stimulus, and it releases glucagon. Glucagon goes to liver, and it leads to release of glucose into the blood. And then when the blood is, like when the glucose concentration is back to normal, there is a negative feedback which like restricts the secretion of glucagon from the pancreas. And the opposite of this happens in insulin. So when there is too much of blood in the glucose in the blood, it leads the beta cells to release insulin. Insulin leads to liver taking up the glucose, or adipocytes taking up the glucose as fatty acids. So all these are happening to reduce the blood glucose concentration, and again the blood concentration comes to a normal like value. There's a negative feedback to stop the like the production of insulin. Okay. So there is a related, so diabetes is related to the malfunctioning of the system, and we will see this when we are actually doing the blood sugar control regulation in the coming slides. Okay, the next gland is pineal gland, and it is called epiphysis. It is a small gland, and it is mainly secreting melatonin. So melatonin is serotonin derived hormone, which is regulating the sleep patterns, basically circadian system and seasonal system, and it is stimulated by darkness. So melatonin basically induces sleep, and because it is stimulated by darkness, it is why in nights you sleep, because in night, because of darkness, melatonin is secreted and you have the general sleeping pattern. Other than that, it also regulates the reproductive hormone. And to understand how it actually works for the circadian rhythm, we can see that so it works with the sleep wake cycle. So as and when you have the light, it inhibits melatonin secretion, and you have this wakefulness nature. Now you generally don't observe these minute changes of it releasing, like its secretion getting down or more. But when you are sleep deprived, it is when you will start feeling the effect of the glands secretion. So especially if you work as like night shift, or in people who take longer across the border planes, there's something called jet lag. That is a pain that happens when you uh, say you are going abroad. So when you cross a certain amount of time in the journey and you land in your destination, you have a headache which is pertaining because of the travel. So that is called jet lag. And why are these happening? Now this is happening because in these kind of processes, basically you're moving across a border, and there is a time delay in across the borders. Or in night shift, when you're supposed to be sleeping, you have to be wakeful, you have to be awake for your duty. So your circadian rhythm coincide with the day and night cycle. And here, because there's a deviation from the normal schedule, these individuals who are supposedly working at night, they will find it very difficult to fall asleep in the day. And they also, that's why they also stay awake in the next night, because their normal cycle is disrupted because of the working, or because of the uh, working condition that they are in. And because of which the pineal gland, because it is perceived by light, and if it is perceived by darkness, if there is darkness, it will lead to melatonin secretion. But because we are we are actively working against the system, that's why there is this problem when you have a night shift or a jet lag. Okay, the other glands are thymus glands, and thymus glands are also present somewhere here in the neck region, mainly concerned with the secretion of T cells. And T cells, as we know, they are very important for the immune system of the body. Try to remember, we have T cells and B cells. So these T cells they get matured at thymus, and from here they are released for their respective functions. Now when these thymus, they keep becoming smaller as and when you reach a certain age. So let's say at the crossing of 14 or 15 years, The thymus starts becoming smaller and smaller, and the thymosin, the product, the hormone, they keep getting reduced, and which is why in older individuals as compared to infants, you have more weaker immunity compared to the infants because of the reduction in size. The next one is gonads, which are the last one basically. So these are the reproductive organs, the testes and the ovaries, and they work mainly to regulate the reproductive cycles. So we have already seen about the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which work on ovaries and testes to release the androgens and the estrogens, and they are also under the control of positive loop that we have studied and negative loop to control their concentration, to control their values. Okay. Again, just to summarize all these different slides that we have gone over, I'll just briefly go over this, but it will stay in the presentation, and so you can come back always and stop the video and look at it. So you have pituitary gland. So we have hypothalamus, which release these different hormones, releasing hormones that work on the pituitary gland and the anterior, posterior and the anterior gland. The posterior release these oxytocin and ADH, which are peptidic in nature, and they work on the nervous system and the water salt balance. While the anterior have these different protein compounds of hormones which work on different systems. You have pineal gland, which secretes melatonin, which works for the light and dark circles. We have studied about thyroid glands releasing the TSH and calcitonin, which are responsible for maintaining the calcium level in the blood. Parathyroid works along with thyroid gland to maintain the calcium level. We have gone over thymus glands, adrenal, pancreas, testes, and ovaries. So we have discussed all of these, and we have seen how they function on different systems. So this was what I was referring to. So we will do blood glucose regulation in detail. We have already discussed this, so this should not be too difficult for you to understand, but just to have a flowchart version of how this regulation actually takes place. So uh, again, like I mentioned, that the values can go high up and down in both directions. So if you have, so there is normal blood glucose. If this goes high, now I will stop at certain point of time so that you can recollect what we have read and try to see if you understand it better. So there is blood glucose level has gone up in the system. So what will the system work to? The system will work to reduce the blood glucose. Which hormone works to reduce the blood glucose? Insulin. And how will insulin work by like to reduce the glucose level? It will trigger the body cells to take up glucose. So you want it to be reduced from the blood, so that you want it to be going inside the cells. So it will trigger the body cells to take up the glucose and utilize it for other respiration processes or any other process. If not, it will go to the it will stimulate the liver to store the glucose as glycogen. And because glucose has been taken up by the cells, the blood concentration goes down. But on the contrary, now, if you have low blood glucose, so your level of glucose in the blood is less, so your body would like to increase the concentration of glucose, and it will now secrete glucagon. What were the different processes that I had talked about when you want the glucose to be increased in the blood level? The steps were glycogenolysis, breaking of glycogen, and gluconeogenesis to synthesize new glucose components. So these components, this glucose will be synthesized, released into the blood glucose level will go up, and then the secretion of glucagon will be stopped. Now, I was talking about this. So when there is a broken feedback loop here, which involves insulin mainly, this is when it leads to something called diabetes. So in diabetic patient, you have these insulin which are not functioning properly in the feedback mechanism. What happens here is the person's pancreas is not able to make enough insulin. If you don't have enough insulin, you cannot, like, insulin is responsible for reducing the blood glucose level. If you don't have ample insulin, then your blood glucose level tends to be higher. So either in that case where the body is not making enough insulin, or in conditions like the when the body cells stop responding to insulin. Basically, insulin has to go and tell the cell receptor that okay, you are supposed to now take in the glucose. But what if the cell receptor do not bind to insulin? They just are not able to do it. In that condition also, even if sufficient insulin is being synthesized, the information is not being relayed because the cells are not responding to insulin. Even in those conditions, the blood glucose level will tend to remain higher for a longer period of time. And these have problems because, let's say you have muscles and fat cells. You have these cells which do not get enough glucose. Basically, they're not getting any energy. Glucose is source of energy, and your muscles and fat cells need to respond by taking in glucose. But because they are unresponsive to insulin, they cannot take glucose inside, and as a result you feel more tired because they are not getting energized enough. Other than that, because of high blood sugar level, you have frequent urination, thirst, and dehydration. And over the period of time, these diabetic patients have so much complication because of not getting enough energy and enough resources for their cells. And the two types of problems that I have spoken about, they are again two types of diabetes conditions. So if your body is not able to, like, if they do not synthesize enough insulin, and because of which the muscles are unable to use the use of the glucose, it is type 1 diabetes. While the type 2 diabetes, you have sufficient blood insulin in the bloodstream, but the muscles are not able to respond to this, and because of which there is tiredness or the enhanced problems associated. So that is type 2 diabetes, and they have different manifestations. So the type 1 diabetes will have something called protein breakdown and ketoacidosis. Why is that? Because in this condition you don't have glucose as a source of energy. So this, because there is no glucose as a source of energy, they go to other sources of possible glucose or possible energy, which is glycogen or ketone bodies. They start breaking up ketone bodies to use up the energy. So that's the response when they don't have enough glucose. But if your muscles are not able to respond to insulin at all, then there is obesity or something called insulin resistance. So there are different manifestation of these two diseases. Now, this is what I was referring to the very first set of questions, that if your endocrine system does not function properly, you have diseases or disorders, and we'll see how. So the first is dwarfism. So if your growth hormones, which is secreted by the pituitary gland, is not appropriate or not properly functioning, then you have something called dwarfism, where your growth is retarded and you do not reach a certain optimal level of height. And the opposite is acromegaly. Acromegaly is basically gigantism. So if you have more of this growth hormone being secreted, then it relates to you to grow to an excessive condition, and which is why you have people like who are very tall and they are called gigant. Other than this, you have cretinism. So these are because of thyroid glands. So here you have hypothyroidism. So remember, these were hypo means increased thyroidism. So you have more of thyroid, and this is basically in the infants and kids. And the effect of increased thyroid hormones is in the mental and the physical growth of these kids. Then you have Graves' disease, which is exophthalmic goiter, hyperthyroidism. You see something like this. You have bulging eyes. So the eyes become bigger because of a response to hyperthyroid. So in kids, we had the Cretin's disease, cretinism. Here we have Graves' disease, because of which the eyes basically they bulge out. And this is generally an autoimmune disorder. Autoimmune disorder means basically some problem which is not because of any external factor but because of a genetic issue. So here thyroid gland becomes overreactive and they secrete too much of thyroid hormones, and that's why, because there is no checkpoint, this has several manifestations. One of the major manifestation is bulging eyes. The other is goiter. Related to is goiter. So goiter is the, you would see goiter when you have these neck regions swollen up. So if these, basically your thyroid glands are swelling up, so this condition is called goiter. And here you have again too much of thyroids, and this have many other symptoms like sweating gets too higher and there is excessive weight loss. And then of course there is a swelling of thyroid gland, and this could be because of either reduction in thyroid or hyper like increase in thyroid. So you generally, if thyroid levels goes shoots up or high, people are given thyroid medicines. These are to keep the thyroid in control. So if you have more of thyroid, you are given medicines that reduces the thyroid condition. If you have less of thyroid, you are given thyroid as a stimulant or from the external sources. So that's how you treat these kind of problems. And the other one is, for example, Cushing's syndrome, which is because of too much of cortisol in the body. And because cortisol are acting mainly on the glucocorticoids here, so the glucocorticoids, they basically act on the glucose levels. So if they are too much, as we have already seen, they can lead to high blood pressure. They can also lead to abdominal obesity and weak muscles, weak bones, because they are increase in glucose doesn't mean it is being transported to every other cell equally. Okay. So again, we have had a extensive discussion on endocrine glands. So I have tried to compile multiple questions. So we'll try to revise this in these. So the first question is, the life processes in humans are controlled and regulated by which of these combination of these systems? Is it reproductive and endocrine, nervous and respiratory, endocrine and digestive, or nervous and endocrine? Next, which endocrine gland is present in males but not in females? Next, coordinator between nervous and endocrine. Basically, the connector between the nervous and endocrine system is which of these gland? And which of the following organ is not an endocrine gland but produces hormones? This again, this is not like, because we have discussed this, so it could be easy for you to guess. Yeah, I hope you got that right. So the first is, it was easy for us. We have already seen this nervous and endocrine system. Second was in male, so it was testes. Third was hypothalamus, which is the connector between nervous and the endocrine system. And fourth is kidney, because kidney doesn't directly release the hormone. I mean, it's not part of endocrine gland, but it has several hormones that aids the renal system or excretion system. Next, so effect of hypothyroidism include which of these? Hypo means reduced, so less of thyroids. So there are hormones and the glands. Try to find the one which is mismatched. Next, the dramatic changes in body features which are associated with puberty are mainly because of which. So basically, you have been given the hormones and the organs or glands. Just try to see the correct combination. And the most abundant hormone which is secreted by the anterior pituitary is which of these? Yeah. So the first one is diarrhea, because we have spoken about lethargy being weakness, basically anorexia, not able to eat properly or basically not eating, and weight gain. While diarrhea is more concerned with not related directly to thyroid hormone. Next is so testosterone is testes, correct. Estrogen is from ovary, thyroxine is from thyroid gland, but adrenaline is not from pituitary, it is from adrenal glands. Next, testosterone from testes and estrogen from ovary is correct, because you don't have estrogen from testes, and the reverse. Estrogen is not from adrenal gland and pituitary, but they are mainly from the gonads. And the most abundant hormone which is secreted by the anterior pituitary is the growth hormone. This one. Here, the first question is, which are the hormones which are responsible for flight or fight response? Next, action of parathormone. In the parathormones are parathyroid hormone, basically. So what do they basically act on? And given are some functions, which of these is not a function of insulin? And glucagon works by which mechanism? I guess the first one was easy: epinephrine or non-epinephrine, or adrenaline or non-adrenaline. Uh, Parathormone works on calcium, that too increases the blood calcium level. Insulin does not work for gluconeogenesis. It does not concern with the increase in the glucose. It works by rather making up the glycogen or reducing the glucose level. So if you want to see this, it decreases glycogenolysis. Glycogen, you don't want to break glycogen, so it decreases glycogen. It Glycogenesis is what it promotes. Glycogenesis, so glycogen is synthesis of glycogen. Lipogenesis, the like the storage of the fatty acids to reduce the glucose level from the body blood, but it does not do gluconeogenesis, which is new glucose molecule synthesis. And glucagon acts by conversion of glycogen into glucose because it is not concerned with protein synthesis. It does not slow down glucose formation because it wants glucose production to be increased, and it rather accelerates the conversion from glycogen to glucose. Okay. Moving on to the last segment of today's discussion, which is about excretory system. So basically, excretory system refers to the elimination of the waste product from the organism, and every organism in the planet does that because you have it, and it does not only relate to the urine or the food material which is to be excreted, but you have several components from normal life processes, for example cellular respiration or any chemical like reaction. So all these have to be excreted, and they're generally in the form of fluid, but you also have feces. So you have plants, animals, birds, insects, everyone secreting all the waste. So here is an example. For example, in fishes, the ones who live in freshwater fishes, they live in water less. So they live in water less concentrated than body fluids. What does it mean? Is the outside water, the water in the environment, has less concentration than lesser concentrated than the body fluid. So what do they generally tend? So the I so a basic recap. So this is something called diffusion. So the body cell or any system works to like equilibrate the two environments. So if there is more of water, let's say water is more on the outside and lesser on the inside, the water will flow inside the system to equilibrate the condition. Similarly, on the opposite, if you have solutes more here and solutes less outside, the solutes will move out so that they are equilibrated. So when do we call a system concentrated? When it has more solute than water. So you have more less of water here, so the water flows into equilibrate the condition. When we call it dilute, you have more of the water but less of this solutes, so you have a diluted environment. So keeping this in mind, so you have fishes which are in fresh water. So in fresh water you have less salts. So these animals, they live in water which are less concentrated. The water outside is less concentrated than their body fluids, and so these people tend, because they're less concentrated outside, they're more concentrated inside. So considering that they have less water, so the water, they gain water more and they lose salt easily. So what happens generally is they do not have to drink water because water moves by passive diffusion because of the change in the concentration. But the salt generally moves out to to equilibrate and keep salt at a certain concentration in the body. It has to move uphill. So the general flow will be the salt will move out, but it will not come in. So for getting it inside, it will use an active transport by gills here to get the salts also inside, because the body also leads a particular osmotic concentration. And so their urine generally is less concentrated than body fluids. Now, contrast this to marine system. Marine system has more of salts in the outside environment. So these fishes, they live in water which are more concentrated than the body fluids, and that's why they tend to lose water because the outside water is less, so their water goes out easily and they gain salt more easily. So in them, they drink water because they have to get the water inside somehow, and the salt is moved in by passive diffusion. So to equilibrate their salt concentration, they have to push it out by active transport, that is also by gills. And you can see the difference here. So they have small volume of urine because they are required to drink water more, and their urine will be slightly less concentrated than the body fluid. But now you have terrestrial vertebrates or us, for example, and we tend to lose body water to air by evaporation, by sweating. So we have to drink water, and we also take in salt to maintain our osmotic concentration. So ours is a moderate volume of urine, and we have more concentrated urine than the body fluids. And so this is about urine, but other than that, the components that are secreted are also different in these different organisms. So you have uh, the fishes, they generally secrete ammonia. The birds, they secrete uric acid, and some of the insects and reptiles also secrete uric acid. And the mammals secrete urea, mammals along with sharks and amphibians and bony fishes. So what do you call these kind of animals generally? So fishes who generally secrete ammonia, they are called ammonotelic organism. Birds, insects, reptiles which secrete uric acid are called uricotelic, and mammals or amphibians who secrete urea, they are called ureotelic. So this is how you classify these organisms. So you have mollusk and echinodermata, they secrete amino acids, and ammonia is a primary excretory product in animals, and it is also the most toxic nitrogenous waste. So generally in amphibians, which is here, or aquatic animals, they are secreted by diffusion. But in mammals, which I have just told that they secrete urea, these are comparatively less toxic, and they're also less soluble in water. While the uric acid is again, so generally if you see uric acid, they are secreted as pellets. So that's how they conserve water, these organisms. And they are secreted by specialized organs, specialized system. For us, we have kidney or the entire renal system, but for different other organism, you have different organs that perform the excretion. For example, in paramecia, which excrete ammonia, that happens via contractile vacuole, as does amoeba. For hydra, which are generally in plant body, water bodies, so they generally from their body surface, they do it by they do excretion via diffusion. You have ascaris, which have specialized cells. For example, here these are called rennet cells. So rennet cells will are responsible for the secretion of ammonia. Periplaneta or cockroaches, they have malpighian tubules which release the uric acid. Then you have palemon or here prawns, for example, they have the antennal gland. So these are here. So right next to antenna, they have the excretory system. Then you have paratima, which are earthworms. You have something called nephridia. So this nephridia system, this nephridiophores, nephridial tubules. So you can see the complexity is now getting higher up as you move across the organism. So you have nephridial system. In spiders, they are again a specialized gland called coxal gland or malpighian tubules. They secrete uric acid. Leucons are sponges, so they again do via general body surface, while Taenia do it by protonephridia. So they are a further step down, and they like further step down means they are not as developed as nephridial system, but they are remnants of nephridia, like protonephridia, and they secrete ammonia. Other than that, you have in planaria, you have these flame cells which also work by simple diffusion. Now, moving on to excretory system in humans. So you have kidney, which actually are the ones which are responsible for the excretion. So here, like I had mentioned, it's not just the waste products which are in the form of carbon dioxide or water or urea or uric acid, but you have chemicals and toxic components which are produced from hormones, from medications that we take externally. All these external compounds which are not used by the body have to be thrown out. And here, because of so many products which are inside our body, just by diffusion it is not enough to throw them out. So you need this specialized system as a whole to do the function. And here we have kidneys, and they, so what they will do is, they will secrete, or they will remove the products which are not used by the body, but at the same time they will absorb these substances which are important, for example nutrients, or we also need water, so they will reabsorb water and other important substances. And the substances like any byproduct or toxic components, they are filtered into the, they put into the urine and they are removed from the body. Then we'll see how. So each kidney, if you see like this, so let's just go over the cross sections. This is kidney. If you see the sections, it will look like this. So if you take one of these sections, you have these sections divided as the upper portion being cortex and the middle or the inner layer being called the medulla. In this, you have these nephrons. In the cortical region, they are called the cortical nephrons. Here, just between the cortex and medulla, they are called the juxtamedullary nephron. And each of these nephron will go and connect to the collecting duct, which will lead to the renal pelvis and which is further connected to a ureter or urethra. Now, in these nephrons, you will see such kind of blood. They are being filtered, or they are being transected by the blood, because that's where they will like they will exchange their the components, like they will absorb nutrients from the blood and they will pass urine, or they will pass it on to urine. So the exchange between the blood and the kidney takes place at this junction. So basically you have so the structural unit in kidney for excretion is nephrons, and there are millions of nephrons in kidney. Each kidney, capillaries of these kidneys, here these capillaries, they filter blood, and there they take essential substances like glucose, amino acids, salts. They are reabsorbed along with water, and the blood, because it is purified now, it goes back into circulation. And then after filtering the blood, the excess water and then wastes, they are converted into urine. And the urine, which is collected via the collecting duct, is connected to the urinary bladder via the ureters. And the urinary bladder are under the control of CNS. So under the certain concentration or a certain volume, when the urinary bladder is stretched or expanded, the CNS gives the cues to excrete. So that's something called micturition, which is under control. And that's the voluntary part. All the other step till the the filling of urinary bladder is involuntary. That is not under control. But micturition, which is the signal to actually pass the urine, is under voluntary control. Okay. So we had come till this point. Now we'll see the nephron structure in detail. So you can see here, these are the nephrons. So we'll do it in details. So the first part is glomerulus. Glomerulus is here, and they are filtrated by the, or basically they are transversed by the blood. So you have blood capillaries and the nephrons in junction, and these are responsible for filtering the blood. Then after this, you have the PCT, or proximal convoluted tubules. So here if you see, so basically what I left to say was a Bowman's capsule. So Bowman's capsule are the location where all these glomerulus are situated, where the blood is present. That part is called Bowman's capsule. Then moving down, you have the proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT. What does the PCT part do? They reabsorb water, ions or nutrients, and they remove the toxins and maintain the ionic balance. And how do they do the concentration on ionic balance? They control the concentration of potassium, hydrogen, ammonia, and reabsorb bicarbonates. So bicarbonates, hydrogen, potassiums are all reabsorbed here. Moving further down, you have the descending loop of Henle. So this loop here is called loop of Henle. There also you have two parts. There is descending and then is ascending. This descending part is permeable to water. So when the urine reaches here, or when the fluid reaches here, water is passed out. So the concentration of water, or it becomes concentrated, the urine gets concentrated, or the filtrate, it's called filtrate. The filtrate gets concentrated because the water is moving out. But as and when it goes to this region, which is the ascending loop of Henle, it becomes impermeable to water but permeable to electrolytes. So now the electrolytes will start moving out. So here, the filtrate now again will get diluted because of the moving of the electrolytes outside. Further, when you move from here, you have the DCT, or the distal convoluted tubule. Again, there will be reabsorption of water and sodium ions here, again making the fluid concentrated. And again, the idea is to maintain the pH and ionic balance. And at the end, you have collecting duct, where you have a large number of, again in the collecting duct, you're trying to reabsorb ample of water. That's why we are recommended to drink a lot of water, because we have a lot of water that has to be reabsorbed. So this was about anatomy. So let's mechanistically describe how does a urine formation takes place. So first is glomerular filtration. Here you have the fluid and the waste products from the kidney. They are filtered from the blood and collected into the tubules. And so here the water and the solutes, which are smaller than the proteins, are forced through the capillary walls and pores of glomerular capsule, this is the glomerular capsule, into the renal tubes. It moves inside the kidney. Now, the rate of the filtrate, or the amount of filtrate which is produced every minute, is called the glomerular filtration rate. This is then followed by tubular reabsorption. So all those reabsorption across the tubules of kidneys, that is called tubular reabsorption. You have the absorption of water, glucose, amino acids, and ions all across the uh, tubules. So the tubules, PCTs, loop of Henle, and the DCTs. And so this finally goes on to the collecting duct. And lastly, you have the secretion. So you also need to, because not only reabsorptions mean taking inside the blood, or taking inside the system. Secretion means putting inside the, or putting into the tubules, so that it goes into the urine. So you also have secretion, where you have the potassium, hydrogen, and ammonia being passed into the like from the body fluids and into the urine to maintain the equilibrium. So this is a summarized version of this. So starts from here, which is the Bowman's capsule. This is the PCT, or proximal tubule. Here you can see that the pink ones are the ones which are taken inside the system. So it goes into the system. What all are taken? The nutrients, which is important to the body, so salts, water, and bicarbonates. And here the pH. So to maintain the pH, they put in the H plus ions and some drugs and poison, which are supposed to be filtered out. So that these are the, so what are these? These are basically the byproducts of the medications or any other components that you take, and you need to be filtered out. Now, after that, they move to the descending loop of Henle, which is permeable to water. So the water is getting reabsorbed here. But as and when they move to the ascending loop, which is impermeable to water but permeable to electrolytes, the salts are now moving out. They further move to the distal tubule. Again here, because here water is being secreted, reabsorbed, bicarbonate and sodium, so you salt, so your urine gets, which was getting diluted here, is becoming concentrated again by the influx of at the same time with the influx of potassium and hydrogen. And lastly, in the collecting tube as well, you have the reabsorption of urea and water and some salts, so to ultimately make the urine less concentrated, not highly concentrated. Now we come to the hormonal regulation of the excretion. So this is what I was referring to the initial slides, that we will discuss this in the coming slide. So we had read about ADH, which was being secreted by the posterior pituitary. And so how does that function? So ADH is also called vasopressin, and they regulate the amount of water which is secreted by the kidney. And how does that do it? They directly act on the water reabsorption from the kidney tubules, and the salts and the waste are concentrated thus in the urine. And this action is, of course, it is controlled by the hypothalamus. So How do they work here? If we see here, so let's say this water concentration, this is normal concentration, and you drink too much water, was drunk, so the water content becomes too high in the blood. Now you are drinking too much of water, too much, more than what is suggested. So there is too much of water in the body, so the signal goes to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and they release signal so that what is needs to be done, what it's supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be throwing that water out. So low volume of water is being reabsorbed by kidney, and that's why you have high volume of dilute urine being passed to the bladder. When it is passed, because you have already excreted, now there is now low volume of water which is passed into the blood and bring it back to the normal condition. So this was when it was bring to normalcy. But what if you drink too less of water? So you have too less of water, or you have just eaten very salty meal, so where now water content gets lower. So the signal goes to the pituitary glands and the hypothalamus. They secrete ADH, which acts by increasing the volume of water that is being reabsorbed. And because water is getting reabsorbed, there is small volume of concentrated urine which is passed, and that is high volume of water passes into the blood because it has been reabsorbed into the system, and the water is brought back to normal concentration. So that's the overall flow. How does that work? And that's what we have mentioned here. That is mainly controlled by dehydration or physiological stress, and the Q there being the osmolarity, the level of concentration of the ions in the water. If it crosses the threshold level, then it raises the ADH secretion and it leads to water retention, which leads to increase in the blood pressure, because that's the volume of water in the blood goes up. And final details, if you want to see how it's actually done. So this ADH, because they want water to be reabsorbed, they make the kidneys more permeable to water. And so the water, they are so very specifically, if you have water channels in the kidney, they are called aquaporins. So these work on the aquaporins, and they work by moving the water out of the kidney tubules through these porins, reducing the volume and to bring back the osmolarity to normal level. Now, as the osmolarity here decreases, the negative feedback mechanism starts to act, and here the signal is given to hypothalamus to reduce the ADH secretion, and as a result, because ADH goes down, these concentrations are brought to normal. Now, ADH release can be reduced by certain substances like alcohol, and because you're so this is disrupting your system. This is how you can disrupt your system, and that's why sometimes that's why people who drink alcohol feel dehydrated, because this, when you are taking alcohol, what was ADH doing? ADH was making your blood uh, like your water concentration higher in blood. Because your alcohol reduces ADH, you have more urine production, and because you are excreting water at a rate which is lower than what you're consuming, you feel dehydrated when you take alcohol, and that's how it functions. The other hormone which is regulating the excretion is called aldosterone, and this is released from the adrenal cortex, and they also work to maintain the electrolyte concentration in the extracellular fluid. But in contrast to ADH, they promote reabsorption of water to maintain a proper water balance. And they also, along with this, they also work for sodium and potassium secretion. So they work by potassium secretion into the fluid and sodium reabsorption uh, in the kidney tubules. And yeah, so and there that's so aldosterone can also be called as a mineral corticoid because they work on the minerals, so the electrolytes, and they are secreted by the adrenal glands. So overall, this adrenal aldosterone can stimulate decrease in blood sodium level, blood uh, because they are reabsorbing the sodium. They reduce blood volume and blood pressure, and an increase in blood potassium because they are secreting the potassium. They want the potassium to be out so that they can put it in, and it also prevents the loss of sodium from sweat or saliva because they are reabsorbing. So all these are additional effects of the aldosterone. Right now, This system of aldosterone is not just directly controlled by a hypothalamus. There is a long procedure, and it is how complex our system is. There is something called renin angiotensin aldosterone system, which is activated so that this whole mechanism because of which aldosterone works takes place. So we'll see here. The production of aldosterone is stimulated by low blood pressure, right? But what happens is when the blood pressure drops, this system, which is called RAS system, is activated. And how does it work? So in the juxtaglomerular apparatus, in the initial portion of the kidney, uh, so this reduction in the blood pressure is detected, and the first system or the first hormone to get released is renin. Renin is an enzyme and which is circulating in the blood, and it reacts with the plasma protein in the liver, which is called angiotensinogen. When angiotensinogen is acted by renin, it is cleaved into its product, which is angiotensinogen 1 and angiotensinogen tensin 2 in the lungs further. When it goes to lungs and becomes angiotensin 2, there it works on the adrenal cortex now to release the aldosterone. So it is not directly on the adrenal cortex, but it is via all this big system or chain of components that you have the secretion of aldosterone, which will further lead to the sodium absorption and water retention. And adding to this, the angiotensin 2 is a vasoconstrictor, so it also increases the ADH and the thirst, because you want more of water to to be taken in. So this is how we summarize. So you have the renin working on angiotensin to give angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 directly will lead to because it's vasoconstrictor, it will lead to constriction of blood to really increase the blood pressure, and it will decrease the glomerular filtration rate, so you want more of water to be retained in the blood, and increases thirst, so basically it works to increase the water in the system. Other than that, it will increase the ADH and aldosterone. So aldosterone will further act on the nephron's distal tubule at the end to try to reabsorb more of water and sodium, which was what the role of distal tubule was, so that you increase the blood volume. And ADH will also be stimulated by angiotensin, where it will so it will work to insert the aquaporins into the nephrons. Aquaporins work for water, so they will collect, so their water will be reabsorbed because of these aquaporins, and as a result there also they will lead to constriction of the arteries, all this to increase the water concentration in the body. Okay. So based on excretion system also, these are some questions that have been compiled. So we have these questions where the first is, which of these following organism has flame cells? We discussed this for excretion. Next, this pressure, which of this pressure facilitates filtration while urine is being formed? So what is the main pressure that dictates the urine formation? Next, capillary hydrostatic pressure during filtration is built in the glomerulus. Why? Like, why is this pressure there? So is this because of the size of woman's capsule is significantly large, and afferent arteriole is narrow compared to efferent. So afferent arteriole is what brings the blood. Efferent arteriole is when the blood flows out. So from the the blood that moves out after filtration. Or Bowman's capsule is cup shaped, so it increases cup surface area, and an efferent arteriole is narrow compared. So if which one is which one is being narrow or which one being lesser in size will increase the filtration rate or pressure. And which of the following phyla have nephridia as structure? So we have discussed this currently, but if you could remember from the discussion that we have, it would be good. Yeah. So the answer for the first one for flame cells are flatworms. We were reading about planaria. Second is filtrate hydrostatic pressure is important for urine formation. How much filtrate? Glomerular filtration rate. filtered hydrostatic pressure. And the capillary hydrostatic pressure is where you have the exchange between the blood and the nephrons. So that is because the efferent arteriole is narrow. So the blood that comes out is that arteriole is narrow as compared to the one that brings in the blood. That brings the pressure for capillary hydrostatic pressure. And nephridia is present in alleles that we had done in the slide. The next set of questions and the last set of questions are: ammonia is secreted by which of these structures? So basically, first of all, we are secreted in which organism, and that organism uses which of these system. Next is which of the following are excretory system of crustaceans? So which were which are the excretory organs for crustaceans? Crustaceans involves prawns. So which were the ones for them? And guanotelic. So other than ammonotelic, ammonia, uric acid and urea, you also some of the organism also secrete guanosine or guanins. So they are called guanotelic. So you can try to guess which of these could be an organism which is not a guanotelic, so which does not secrete guanins. And Malpighian tubules are the excretory of which of these excretory sector of which of these organisms. Yeah, so the first one was fish. So fish use gills. Second is crustaceans. We had seen prawns, so we had seen about antennal glands. Next, about Malpighian tubules, we had seen in peripranata cockroaches and insects. And starfish are not guanotelic because they are in marine habitat, so they are more of the ammonotelic. Yeah, that's the questions. So this is where I end for today. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the chat box, or you can ask me in the comment section of my video, or you can always put it in the discussion forum or email to us. We will be happy to help you. Thank you.